Hi guys, something I touched on during the live stream is on whether the new plans to diverge from the EU on AI, which the Prime Minister raised this week, is a Brexit benefit or not. Now this was raised by hardline unionist and Brexiteer Jim Allister in Parliament on Wednesday. Now the Northern Ireland Secretary of State didn't really answer Jim's question when it came to whether Northern Ireland as a result of Brexit would have to follow EU rules in respect to AI development and the rollout. But don't worry Jim, there's a silver lining of sorts. Have a listen.
Regulate in a new way, an independent way. Do you see your freedom there as a Brexit benefit? Are you pleased that you can regulate in a different way? Some people probably expected you as Prime Minister to tack a little towards the EU. It sounds here as though you might be tacking a bit away.
Well, look, I think it is important to recognise that we've got the freedom now in relation to regulation to do it in the way that we think is best for the UK, and that's what we intend to do. You're right to say there are different models around the world. There's a sort of EU approach or a US approach, but we have the ability to choose the one that we think is in our best interest, and we intend to do so.
This week the Prime Minister has spoken of the unbridled economic opportunities in developing AI, but of course it is not an unbridled opportunity for Northern Ireland, because instead of living under British regulations that affect the AI, we live under much more restrictive EU regulations. So when would the Secretary of State move to release Northern Ireland from the restrictions of foreign jurisdiction under the EU?
Well, I say to the Honourable Gentleman, the substantive provisions of the EU AI Act do not currently apply in Northern Ireland, would only apply following an agreement in the Withdrawal Agreement Joint Committee, and any decision would be subject to the democratic safeguard mechanisms in Schedule 6B of the Northern Ireland Act 1998.
Okay, so Hilary Benn is not being completely honest here, because he's saying here, look, Northern Ireland is not, these EU rules do not apply to Northern Ireland. Well, not all of them, or the majority don't. That's not completely true, because the Northern Ireland is, in a sense, covered under the EU AI Act. Now, as I said, there's a silver lining for Jim Allister. Well, what he can do is he can pull the Stormont brake. Well, not him, but his MLAs can pull the Stormont brake. And I've mentioned that before. The Stormont brake is you need 30 MLAs, 30 members of the Northern Ireland Assembly to say, we don't want this legislation to go ahead. And they pull the brake if they can get those 30 MLAs. Now, we've been down this road before. There was recently a pulling of the brake by the DUP. It's currently being looked at by the Secretary of State. But once again, if Northern Ireland doesn't want to apply certain legislation, for example, EU legislation like this, then it can pull the Stormont brake. But you can't keep pulling the brake, because the Secretary of State will look at it and say, look, you know, there's nothing really to see here. You have to follow the rules. This is a consequence of Brexit. This is a consequence of what Jim Allister campaigned for and still believes in. To leave the European Union. But he didn't understand, or he didn't care about the consequences of leaving the European Union, knowing that a border would have to go somewhere. And if you want to respect the Good Friday Agreement, well, the border makes more sense in the Irish Sea than it does on the island of Ireland. Jim Allister, as I mentioned before, wanted to have the border on the island of Ireland, but no one was going to play that game. So this is the consequence of that. Once again, if the Northern Ireland Assembly is not happy with this EU AI regulation or legislation, then what they can do is they can pull the brake. But they can't keep pulling the brake, because that's going to upset the Northern Ireland Secretary of State, and it's just going to knock it down each time. If you want to pull the brake, it has to be for something fundamental to Northern Ireland. This at the moment is not something fundamental to Northern Ireland. As I said, not all of the legislation, it seems, will apply to Northern Ireland, but probably most of it. But I don't even think that Jim Allister understands AI. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot.